Few of you know me, and many of you know Congressman Schweikert. I'm Jon Frutkin from Radix Law. Let me give you a little bit of very quick background on Congressman Schweikert. He represents the 6th District in English. That is, of course, Scottsdale, PVs, Carefree, Fountain Hills.
Yeah,
more or
if
less.
you were ever going to have a congressional ticket, you got to admit, I won. Amazing district.
So about 700,000 people, and we don't have everybody in this room tonight, but we got a lot of. Congressman Schweikert serves on the Ways and Means Committee. We're going to talk a little bit about what that is. And so if we can, let's give a round of applause to Congressman Schweikert. So tonight, what we're going to do is this. There are cards on the tables, pens. Marnie Steinberg, who's kind of waving her hand back there, is going to circulate and pick those up. But before we kind of get going with that, a couple kind of beginning comments. Everybody knows Congressman Schweikert's a Republican. Most of you know that I'm a Democrat, but we have a lot more in common probably than differences. I wrote the book on equity crowdfunding. Congressman Schweikert wrote the law on equity crowdfunding.
Do you see a bipartisan hug coming?
Now, you are a United States Congressman. I was an intern on the Hill for a guy named David. And my understanding is that neither of us have personally met Donald Trump. Is that right?
Yeah, never met him.
But, we're going to, yeah, so we're going to start, I guess, with the kind of few minutes of political, because, of course, that was the way that we dragged you all in here. Congressman Schweikert is, of course, known as, the polite way they say this in Washington is you're a policy wonk. You're known as a policy guy. And so we're really going to pick your brains.
He's trying to explain why I have no friends.
Here we would say that you're a genius or a nerd, but we need to talk about politics. So sure. Your impression, it's been a little bit more than 100 days of the Trump administration, things you like about what's going on, things that you don't.
Am I okay without the microphone, or do you need?
It's fine. You're great.
You're strong. I could do with a lot less of the chaos theory.
Right.
Look, how many of you have ever been? You had a tech startup at one time. A lot of business out there today does this sort of chaos theory of let's just throw it all out and things will stick. I don't think that works when you have a nuclear arsenal.
Correct.
And I would like to see much greater discipline. Now, on the flip side, what I do like is what happens in a world where you have someone like a Mick Mulvaney who is heading Office of Management and Budget. Most people don't realize it's probably the second most powerful position in the federal government. They control the budgets. They actually control where the money allocation. They control the rules. And Mick is a genius. He's also a deficit hawk. There's a number of things where he's policy-wise very different than the president. And so there's sometimes my angst of saying the administration has been populated over here by some very disciplined, very smart people. And over here I have this sort of theatrics. And look, I'm really good at math. I'm sometimes not really good at people. And I could do with a lot less theater and more people owning calculators. So if that's an elegant way to say it.
So there was some discomfort kind of audibleized by the senators about the Jim Comey firing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of commentary?
I don't get it. And look, no, I just don't get it. Have you ever had those moments saying, okay, and also I don't get it, I'm sorry, I also don't get it from the left too, because 3 days ago, I can show you stacks of letters and stuff I had from my Democrats in the district who wanted us to go out, hunt this man down, and throw him under a vehicle. And today, those same people are writing me letters saying, you need to defend him, and that just a little intellectual consistency somewhere from anyone.
One of the kind of mythologies, I guess, that comes out of Washington these days is the Freedom Caucus. Mm-hmm. And so kind of maybe the media, caricature of it is that it's kind of this group of people who are kind of on an extreme. You're a member of it. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Freedom Caucus, about what role it plays in kind of your day-to-day and kind of where it fits in the Congress?
All right. A couple points of reference on Freedom Caucus. It is by invitation only. It's more libertarian leaning than conservative. So there's a number of folks who hold themselves up as conservative who do not get invitations because they say crazy stuff. And I'm being brutally honest. It was formed because under the previous speaker, a lot of us had ideas, whether it been on the left, on the right, you wanted to offer an amendment, and you were forbidden to walk onto the floor and offer an amendment, or go to Rules Committee and offer. The process had become so centralized and closed that unless you were part of the cool kids, you didn't get to legislate. And look, the fact of the matter, the way we live out here in the West, we are different than how you live in Delaware. But the guy from Delaware, because he was a favored child, could offer amendments all day long, but a lot of us were frozen out. So the Freedom Caucus actually came together as a access to legislate sort of process reform group. And we had some great success in that. Now the difficulty is, as you all of a sudden wake up one day and you have the responsibility to legislate, you're no longer an opposition party. How do you teach a lot of your brothers and sisters that are very philosophical and say, I know you're a classic libertarian, guess what? I need the math to work. And I am a little different than a lot of my brothers and sisters. They're all very smart, but I'm the only Westerner, I'm the only Freedom Caucus, I'm the only person there who actually holds a seat on something like Ways and Means. There's only 24 of us, and we are responsible for trade, the tax code, trying to keep the social entitlements with enough cash so they don't collapse in the next decade. I mean, you feel the weight of the world on you. And then I have this additional responsibility of going around the conference and bringing my little charts and trying to help people understand, saying, I know this is how you feel, but here's the math. And so a lot of my life is I am the go-between from a lot of policy mechanics to a lot of members. Okay, this is a long answer, but I'll try to make it really quick. And the healthcare thing, Bill, we just went through. I have one member who has a PhD in boll weevils.
Really?
He's a PhD in boll weevils. He's on the agricultural committee. He's freaky smart on boll weevils. If you want to know about infestations on crops in Central Africa, he's your guy. Go to him and say, hey, I need you to work with me on the actuarial modeling of the 5% of our brothers and sisters who are 50% of the healthcare costs, how we mitigate this cost so we can lower the entire premium efficiency to make healthcare for the small portion of the population that buys in the individual market affordable. And he looks at me and goes, I do boll weevils. That is the new world I'm trying to learn, is to dial back the arrogance of saying, hey, we have a great idea, everyone should embrace it. And realize I have 435 members around me that all have very different life and technical expertises. And look, it's like you in security law. How often do you talk to another lawyer that's not from your specialty, and you find yourself doing pictographs to sort of work them through how the law works? And we're trying to get better at that. I mean, for a lot of us, we've been now the governing party for, 3.5 months. We're trying to get better at it.
So last week you went to the floor, and the mythology is that you set a record for charts in a congressional
I
speech.
watched it. It was awesome.
If you watch it, if you two watch it, you're one of 7 or 8 people that watch it.
So this speech was about a number of topics, but almost all of it was about healthcare. So talk a little bit about the kind of challenge, right? And then talk a little bit about what you see happening, if anything, as this makes its way through the Senate.
Okay, I'll try to do this in like 3 minutes. Can I have us all sort of scrub everything you think you know about healthcare? My world is how to pay for it. You may be a brilliant entrepreneur, you may be a brilliant doctor. My world has always been, how do I pay for it? In a previous life, I did the budgets for access, and which is our Medicaid system. So for me, it's always been about the math. Since 1986, we as a country have had guaranteed service. You got to understand, since 1986, we passed a law back then that functionally said, you walk into the hospital with cancer, you walk in bleeding, you get service. So the debate has been, how do you pay for it? Do you remember the uncompensated care issues at hospitals, the disproportionate share? I was a disproportionate share negotiator in the early 90s for Arizona. So for 31 years, we've had sort of guaranteed services. The ACA comes along and says, hey, we're going to go from guaranteed services to guaranteed issue. Guaranteed issue of health insurance if you're part of that individual market. In this congressional district, it's only 2% of the population that buy in that individual market. Okay. And here's how we're going to do the distribution of who pays. Problem what happened is, in the ACA model is the way it was structured is the cost was so high for the 50% of our population that only uses 3% of healthcare, our healthiest 50%, they're just not buying. They're just not participating. So you end up what's this cost concentration saying, if they don't buy, the cost goes up, the cost goes up, the cost goes up. And for the folks that are buying, it keeps going, and the providers for that individual market disappear. So now in Arizona, we have a true crisis. You have only one provider in each county. Next year, we may have a third of our counties with no provider, no insurance company willing to write. In Maricopa County, if you're part of that, if you bought on the exchange, you're part of the middle group, the silver plan, you had 145% price hike yesterday, or this year. We were just trying to come up with a model saying, how do you get the healthy, that 50% to participate? So that's where the idea of the risk-sharing models that I was able to get attached that say our sickest 5% of the population is 50% of all the healthcare spending. How do I bend their cost curve for, I know we're talking about human beings, but their cost toxicity in the rest of the pool? How do I go from the current law, which says we have 3 age brackets in community rating and smoking, let's go to 5 age brackets plus smoking, because if we can get the costs down for our healthy population at sort of 45 and younger, you get this price efficiency that everyone benefits. That's all this is about. It's still guaranteed issue. You can walk in tomorrow with hemophilia. You get the same price as everyone else in that band. So when someone says, well, if you have a pre-existing condition you can't buy health care, they're lying to you. It's just, it was a math problem. Unless we can find as a society to get our brothers and sisters who are part of that population that use very little insurance services today, they will in the future, to participate. I can't get premium efficiency up and down the curve. And we've seen a mandatory system, where you get charged penalties, you ask for waivers. So we started and I'm almost done, 2007, 14.6% of our society were uninsured. We've now spent $500 billion. I have 10.9% of my population that's uninsured. So we've spent $500 billion for this tiny movement in our society. We could have bought them all their insurance and a moderately priced house. The math just doesn't work. We need to be much more creative, but here's the punchline. Whether you're on the left or the right, all we're doing is moving the cost around. Until we do disruptive things in information and competition, and forgive me, lawsuit reform, in technology, I believe technology, for those of you who are entrepreneurs, get ready. There is a revolution coming in healthcare technology where this is about to become your primary care physician. This is about to become your manager of your chronic condition. And those of you who are entrepreneurs that help us build those individual monitors, the technology to do it, you're going to not only probably do really well for yourself, you're going to help save the society. But all we've done law-wise our policy-wise, is we're just moving the chairs around in the cost, because we've done nothing to pull cost out of the system. The next step has to be the revolution in bending the cost curve.
So do you see kind of or hear what's going on in the Senate, and do you expect that arm of this can get their act together this year? Or
Do you think senators talk to House members?
I think at least like 5 talk to you.
Yeah, I am blessed to have a couple freaky smart staffers. We don't actually let them out in society, and bathing is optional with one of them. But no, seriously, they're just brilliant. And we're working very hard to say, we spent months building as much of the model and saying, here's how we think we can touch a lot more of society for the same money. Please look at this, but we're still trapped, and you understand this. We're trapped in doing a piece of legislation at first that has to maneuver through a weird set of Senate rules called reconciliation. So a lot of things we should be doing, we're actually forbidden by the rules. And when you do the other really creative stuff that has to happen bipartisan, because that will require Democrat U.S. senators to work with us. I've had conversations with a couple senators I'm friendly with, but I'm back to what we were talking about before. I'm drawing them charts. And we'll do our best to have as much healthy influence on it. But the one thing is, whether you love the ACA or not, at least for Arizona, we don't have a choice. We gotta fix this portion for the individual market. We need to do it almost immediately, because insurers are starting to build their actuarial models for next year's rate package. And it's not gonna be healthy if the plumber in, Casa Grande no longer can buy on the individual market, and we're already working on some fallback ideas. But at least for us in Arizona, this isn't a game. I gotta make this work.
So we have tax, which might even be a nerdier topic than healthcare, but equally kind of interesting to everybody here. One thing that's interesting to me: you were on the Financial Services Committee a couple times.
Thank you for mentioning it that way.
Now,
What he's saying is, I was on it, I got thrown off of it, I got back on it.
Now, in fairness, this is something else we have in common. I've been thrown out of pretty much everywhere. So, when you were on the Financial Services Committee, kind of the first go around, Jobs Act passed, probably the only, thing that we had on both sides of the aisle.
When I am buried, that probably is my epitaph. Hey, he somehow got this Jobs Act thing when he was a freshman.
Yep. And subsequent to that, we have a lot of people who are investors here, a lot of people who raise money for their businesses. Another area that you've been kind of passionate about is the definition of accredited investor, who it is that can invest in a private deal. That and kind of other topics relating to that past life. We have a new SEC chair, et cetera. What do you see changing, I guess, in the world of capital formation from kind of your perch?
Well, we could have spent all time on this one.
I know.
Can I just run through a handful of things? And first, I'm going to make the first one slightly longer, just because this one means a lot to me. And I actually think I have a couple senators that are going to do the accredited investor with us this year. If I came to you tomorrow, and we were just talking about this, and said, societally, here's our rule. We're only going to let people with $1 million in the bank actually invest in certain types of deals.
Right.
Because obviously, because they have $1 million in the bank, that means they're freaky smart on these deals, right?
Right.
Because somehow they inherited or had $1 million. But the PhD in the back, or the person that knows the business, but you don't have $1 million, so you don't get to invest. Oh, by the way, we have a crisis in our society where, I hate to say, wealthier, the curve is steepening. We got a problem here, but the vast, vast, vast majority of our society isn't allowed to take a risk, take a participation. So we're getting down to the point where only 600,000 people of our population meet the definition of being an accredited investor. It's crazy. You can't have a conversation about everyone having a chance in society and then say to the 99% of the society, you don't get to participate. 98% of the society. So I have this fixation of this concept of the accredited investor, of changing it, saying, and where this came from is one of my best friends is a guy named Lakshmi. He's an electrical engineer down at Intel. Guy has a PhD in electrical engineering. He has a bad habit. He likes to buy toys. He's incredibly well paid, but he has toys like crazy. Some of his best friends started a business. They were going along, and it happened to be a technology he's freaky smart on, and he wasn't allowed to be one of their investors because they had already filled up the tree.
35.
And so he wasn't allowed to invest in something that he's a PhD in electrical engineering on, and he knows everyone in the group because he didn't have $1 million in the bank. That's insane. So how do you change the world that if you have some risk tolerance, if you're younger and have maybe more risk variability, if it's something you're actually interested in, if you're willing to, that you can actually also participate in the investor class of society. And this actually ties into a lot of other things we're doing, where crowdfunding, the 506 offerings, the Reg A sort of models, how do you turn more of the society into being part of the investor risk-taking participation class so you get a much broader breadth of upward mobility? And that's what this is all about. So in the Jobs Act, I didn't know better. I had these ideas about how to change the Reg A, how to allow the road shows so people could go and actually tell more about their ideas instead of having to worry about the SEC lawyers coming down on them, building crowdfunding, all these things. And we kept being told you can't do that. The president's going to. So I kept hanging out in this guy named Barney Frank's office. Well, it turns out Barney is actually a brilliant guy, funny as can be.
Really funny.
And when he is convinced that it's not some sort of crazy libertarian plot. Seriously, I didn't know better that you weren't supposed to go into the ranking member's office and hang out there and say, can I talk to your staff about this idea? And eventually, all of a sudden, this light bulb went, and it became a bipartisan movement.
Nice.
And Barney Frank sort of said, okay, on some of it I need to vote, but I'm going to let my people work with you.
Nice.
And because of my being an idiot, we had probably one of the greatest successes we had over those couple of years of something that went through, the president signed. And it can be done. You just have to be sometimes willing to hang out in Barney Frank's office.
So we're going to talk a little bit about tax. To frame this a little bit, Congressman Schweikert's only the second Arizona member ever to be on the Ways and Means Committee, correct?
Yep.
And the Ways and Means Committee is the only committee we have in the Constitution, right?
Correct.
And the Ways and Means Committee
And
in
they
the
have a
House,
secret handshake.
which we will now learn. In the Ways and Means Committee is where all the tax bills must begin. And
Tax,
so
trade, Medicare, Social Security. I mean, it's terrifying.
So it turns out to be a little bit important. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. Real briefly, you mentioned reconciliation before. It is probably one of the most important things that's kind of facing you as the Ways and Means Committee puts together. There is literally 3 people in the room who know what the heck that means. So could you just talk a little bit about what this rule is, reconciliation, and then what it means, and hopefully between the two of us we can explain that.
First off, in healthcare, it basically means only the work from a couple committees is allowed to be part of the bill. So there's other externalities we needed to take care of, some VA healthcare issues that affect it, and we can't even touch them because it blows up the bill and violates the Senate rules, and the Senate rules says, hey, you can't do this with 51 votes, you now need 60 votes, it can be filibustered, it doesn't happen. In tax, we can do it through reconciliation, but it has to sort of demonstrate that at the end of 10 years, it actually comes into compliance. Now, we can now use some dynamic scoring, but this is also very important. Some of us are fixated. I'm fixated on debt. I actually see, if you actually look at the demographic curve, we have some incredible societal problems. So can I take 2 steps sideways?
Yeah, please.
Okay. If I came to everyone in this room, and if you're sitting in this room, you've done okay in life. And I turn to all of you and say, what's the greatest threat to your society? seriously, over the next 20, 30 years, I have a 19-month-old, the best baby in the world. You know, my wife and I were able to adopt about 19 months ago. What's her life going to be like? The greatest threat, I believe, to our society is we have this demographic curve of baby boomers retiring. And there's absolutely no way we have the resources to meet our social entitlement promises.
True.
The fact of the matter is, Medicare hits a wall, Social Security hits a wall. We've known this we knew we had baby boomers for 60-some years, right? Somehow Washington avoided the issue. We must have, our society must have robust economic growth. And you do it partially through tax, you do it through regulatory reform, you do it through health, you do it through immigration, you do it through technology, and you got to do it all at once. So I need you to think of what we're doing is sort of the unified theory. You know, we haven't been able to figure out string theory yet, but we are sort of working on this economic growth theory, and you got to do it all together. You need to take this tax system and turn it upside down. We've now gone 10 years with almost no productivity growth. We actually see that our brothers and sisters who are in that hard-working middle, if you actually look at this part of our society that's there in what we'll call the FICA tax population, have had almost no real expansion in their lot in life. And it's substantially because the tax code disincentivized capital investment. It incentivized financial restructuring over manufacturing restructuring. So if I come to you tomorrow and say, all right, you need to look at this as a couple layers. Here's individuals. Let's make it simple, incredibly fair, but lower the rates in a way, but it also means taking away a whole bunch of the deductions because the deductions become distortions. Come over here to corporate taxes, and can we start to turn it upside down so it's looks more like a cash flow tax, more like a consumption model, that I incentivize you, you have an idea, you can raise some money for it, you spend the money, the plant and equipment you buy, it's 100% expensing instantly to incentivize you to do that. But let's take away things like the interest deductions so we disincentivize financial structures of let's just do leverage buyouts. The whole model is all designed to maximize economic growth and actually sort of try to create a distribution of fairness, and within the 10 years come into and then continue to grow out, because we want to make it permanent. And for reconciliation, for meeting the budgetary rules to make this a permanent tax change, we actually have to hit these rules where within that window, to get permanency, the numbers have to work.
And so, for fault of potentially oversimplifying, it needs to be in balance. In other words, the revenue that comes in, the revenue that comes in needs to be as much as the rates go down. So we're not just talking about dropping rates, although that's obviously an important part. So we all hear about the dropping of rates. Let's talk about some of the stuff that I guess is on the other side that will increase revenue. Obviously, the intent is that a lot of companies will kind of repatriate their money and we'll get some revenue from that. But let's talk about some of the other stuff. Interest deductibility is obviously something that is very interesting. You talked a little bit about the idea of allowing immediate expensing of equipment. Talk about the other side of that, at least the things that you guys have been discussing, at least thus far, on interest deductibility.
We're actually trying to model right now for smaller concerns. Let's say businesses $1 million and less. How much of their book of business would be affected by not being able to deduct interest? What happens if you went out, you're the CNC, you buy a piece of equipment that costs you $500,000, but you're only making $100,000 taxable profit every year? Well, you're going to carry that $500,000, $100,000 every year. You know, just carry it forward. You're trying to model saying, where's the incentive? I've pitched an idea, we'll see, we're asking to have it modeled. For certain businesses in certain categories, should you be able to sell or trade or pledge part of your expensing, so it helps you as a financing vehicle. I'm not building a lot of friends yet on that, but we're going to get modeled and see if that sort of solves one. And if there's no one in this room old enough to remember the early 80s of the safe harbor mechanics. You're not that old. But that's actually part of where the concept comes. There's also, can I actually go step on one of the third
Please.
rails? Because you're going to go there in a moment anyway.
Yes.
We have something called base erosion. How many of you have been investing in stocks for 20 years? How many of those companies that you've invested in over time, you realize
Done.
their headquarters are no longer in the US?
Right.
How many of you know of organizations that buy intellectual property, a new way to make a widget, and now hold that intellectual property in Ireland? So the royalties being paid are actually income to the subsidiary in Ireland because the tax rate is so much more efficient. We are in real trouble. You need to deal with the reality. For the last 30 years, we have this thing called base erosion. If you go back 30 years ago and see all the multinational companies that were based in the United States, and today it's like 1/3 or less than 1/3 what it was 30 years ago, and it's because of our tax structure. How do you do two things? Territoriality. So you have an investment idea. Great. It flows to where the idea is, or where the rate of return, but it can come and go with certain elegance. So when the Apples have $256 billion of cash parked overseas, it can come in and do plant and equipment and technology investment. But if there's an investment, they want to buy something in China, the money can move around. And that was the sin of a previous repatriation where folks said, well, if we bring it in, we may not be able to get it back out. So we never got close to the model we thought would be repatriated in. But the second thing, I need you to work a conceptual idea. You ever travel around the world? What was the last country you went to?
Ecuador.
Oh, okay, beautiful Ecuador. Great guinea pigs. You'll tell everyone the joke later, right?
I might.
Yeah, seriously, it's really creepy. A little guinea pig going on the rotisserie. I'm actually not joking. It's
How do
real.
you know that?
I've traveled. Before I had this job, I spent a lot of my life doing adventure traveling. So I was in Serbia when they were blowing up things. I was in Myanmar. I used to have a life. But when you are traveling through the airport out of Ecuador and you're about to come home, over here on the side is this little counter that says, get your VAT tax back.
Exactly.
Because if you were traveling with someone, you bought them an expensive, shiny object, you get to go over there and say, and they hand you like, in most countries, it's about 20% of that value back. You're the company in Germany. You make a really expensive, beautiful piece of machinery. If the company's selling it to the United States, as it leaves the country, they're given back the value-added tax. The rest of the world has this tax arbitrage on us, where when they send things to us, they get refunded the value-added tax.
True.
But when we make that shiny object or that piece of machinery and sell it to them, it goes out of this country with a full tax load on it and hits their country, and then they put their tax on. So the rest of the world has a tax arbitrage on American manufactured products. So if you're Caterpillar, you're screaming at us saying, I want to be able to sell heavy equipment around the world, but the rest of the world has a 20% arbitrage on us. Help me fix this so as the product's leaving the United States shores, I get a tax adjustment. But if you're Walmart and saying, hey, our supply chain is from around the world, we want their stuff to come in, we don't want you to tax adjust it back up. That's when you hear the discussion about border adjustability. It's controversial because it sort of matters on what side of the equation you're on, but we do have at least a baseline reality. The world has a tax arbitrage on us, and we got to find a solution to this, because that's also part of the territorial tax system and what we call that base erosion, where we're losing our intellectual property and our corporate headquarters. How was that? Did I do okay? Was that clear?
I think you did okay.
All right.
I mean, in
It's
short,
really- it's
in short,
I'm going to do an hour on the floor of the House with a bunch of boards on that
Like
soon.
20 stories
yeah,
from a
I
different
can't promise we could fully explain the border adjustability tax, but of course it's super controversial, right? Because obviously retailers are very against it because it could raise the price of stuff
Yeah.
that's coming in, while manufacturers are in favor of it because of course there's an unfair playing field when they're
Correct.
selling overseas. Okay, so far so good. I at least understand it. What are the politics? I mean, obviously you've got to be getting crushed by
Oh, yeah.
somebody.
So let's be a good example. It turns out there's this little thing called Koch Industries. I'm just going to use them as an example. And they're okay. They, as an organization, they're willing to play in politics. They're huge refiners. So they come in the door and say, hey, we buy a lot of, our refineries are set for types of crude that come from other places in the world. And that leaves that country, they get a refund on the tax system. But if it hit the shores here, you're intending to tax it more because it's coming in from out, and we think you're going to raise the price of refined products, so we're going to spend millions of dollars cutting your head off. Then on the flip side, you get Boeing and certain manufacturers say, hey, we make a lot of stuff here. We'd love to have tax fairness, so we're going to spend lots of money saying how good looking and wonderful you are. And depending, this is coming, you're going to turn on your cable television, and one moment you're going to hear about how I eat kittens. And the next moment you'll hear about how I save kittens.
Yes.
It's about the money. It's always about the money.
Sad.
And remember, what was our base principle? For those of us in the committee, we're just trying to find a way to maximize economic growth and a fair distribution in the society. But it's going to be rough because to fix the base erosion problem, you got to deal with the tax arbitrage, from products coming in and products going out. And so it's all, remember our unified theory? It all links.
So I got a bunch of questions on kind of the popular political topic, which will be immigration. But you were kind of the leader of the "We're Not Shutting Down the Government" group. A lot of that was tied up with what we were going to do with the wall and immigration and things. So talk a little bit about what you see over the next period of time with respect to whether it's immigration, the wall, anything that you want to kind of touch on, especially because it impacts so much this politics of keeping the government running.
Yeah, I don't see it as interlinked as most people do. Look, I've been doing this now 6.25 years. I can't tell you how many times I was one of the people in the meeting, and that night I turn on the television, and the way it's described, I'm going, wow, I wasn't in that meeting. It's one of the problems we have in sort of intellectual discourse and the way we report it. But could we do, let's do 2 minutes on immigration.
Yep.
Because for this room, first, what does our legal immigration model look like today? The United States is going to take in about 1 to 1.1 million legal immigrants this year. Now understand, without that immigration, we as a society have negative population growth.
Right? Yes, exactly.
So this is really important. If we're going to if we're going to keep our promises, positive population growth is really important for economic expansion. But we're the only country functionally in the world, an industrialized country, that has substantially what's called a familial immigration system. Let's just use the million because it's easy numbers.
It's true.
2/3 of the population that will come in legal this year are family sponsorship. I get to sponsor my mom. I get to sponsor my sister. It's familial. Then about another 150,000 will be refugee status. But by the time you get up to what's talent, what's the immigration that comes into the country, H-1Bs, entrepreneurs, these sorts of things, it's about 130,000. We're the only country that does this. So if I came to you tomorrow and said, hey, we need to design our immigration system along with our tax system, regulatory system, healthcare, everything else to maximize economic growth. You still want the million one, but you need to probably turn it upside down and be like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, where saying the biggest block of your immigration is talent-based.
Right.
Because that maximizes economic growth. Now, you do make some people mad. You actually make a lot of home countries mad because all of a sudden you're grabbing their smart people. So you need to think about this from a world society standpoint. When you do that, the person that gets the PhD in Ecuador in mathematics all of a sudden goes to the top of the list and gets to be able to immigrate to the United States because we need the PhDs in mathematics. And they get upset because you've created a brain drain around the world. But so there is that societal impact. There'll be others that say, but I want to be able to immigrate my mom. Now you've made my mom part of only 150,000 people. It's going to take years. But from a societal standpoint, the elegance is, I don't care what race you are, I don't care what gender you are, I don't care who you hug. All I care about is what's between your ears. You know, what talent set do you bring? And in many ways, I think that's more elegant. And it's also much more honest about what we need as a nation. Look, there's going to be people who are going to be angry because you're going to have certain high-tech workers that say, hey, it's not fair you're bringing in more people that can code,
Right.
or this and that. But then we get presented the Commerce Department data saying, do you know how many DBA positions are empty around the country where you can't find talent to fill them? And if we could do this smartly, where like Canada has done, where sometimes Canada moves up and down, where they, I guess it was a decade ago, they had this incredible shortage of nurse practitioners. They actually scored that higher to be able to bring in that talent set. It's tricky because I'm not sure I want government being the one to rate, but there's a way to get enough societal data saying, okay, here's how we will score what talent we need in our society. So if I came to you tomorrow, how many of you would you vote for that?
I would.
You do know this administration, the one that sort of ran almost a populist campaign
Right.
about walls and this and that, have been in the background floating
Right.
you know, now it's sort of very quiet, but saying, hey, what if we would do this? What if you would normalize dreamers, normalize those folks who are here, but the trade-off is we get to turn the immigration system upside down. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if the country is ready for the politics of that. But there is this constant discussion going on that Nixon was the only one who could go to China because he was fervently anti-Chinese communism. And that made him to have the credentials to be the one who could open it up. So be prepared that you may start hearing this conversation more and more. And maybe there actually is an elegant solution because the math does work. Now we have to find out if the politics will.
So I have, for answering the hard question, I have the candy question, because I've had this in a few different contexts. You are,
Is that cinnamon?
it's close. It's
What?
technology.
All
So
right.
you
Yeah.
you are a
I'm
founder.
a techno-utopia.
Yes, you're a founder of the Blockchain Caucus. You are very, very active in tech, whether it be in financial areas, whether it be in healthcare. You've just been a champion for it. So talk a little bit about with, I guess, you know, your policy hat on. What is it that you do as a government policy person to promote technology? What's your kind of day-to-day to make that happen, and what are the resistance to that?
I wish I had a flip answer on this one, but there isn't one. Look, help me for a second. How many of my folks in the room are sort of more in the tech entrepreneurial world?
Yes.
Okay.
Totally.
For my folks who do sort of the tech and those who actually care about society and opportunity, I do a lot of trying to build examples. I realized I have a bit of a degree of expertise in distributed ledger. Like I was one of those very first geeks that spent some time trying to break Bitcoin in the nodes and those things. I used to be an SQL VB programmer at one time. Yeah, I wasn't good, but I was. And I still run my whole server setup. But so let's see if I can do this as sort of an example. How do you get our brothers and sisters in policy to start realizing this is the revolution? So, for my folks that raised their hand, do I have anyone at also part of your tech business you write apps? Do I have an app writer? Okay. If I came to you tomorrow and said, I have an idea, and it's free, you get it right now, you will probably make some money and help us as a society. Let's just play math. And we're going to make up some of the numbers. Scottsdale has a $600,000 earth mover. They use it about 4 hours a week. It sits down at the construction yard. Does that enrage anyone that there's pieces of equipment that are only being used 4 hours? If I came to you tomorrow and said, hey, I really need you to design me an app that Scottsdale can take a picture of it, put on the description, here's our cost, here's the rules, and allow Tempe to hit a button on the app and say, we need an earth mover on Tuesday for 7 hours. Well, why can't you do that with all government, whether it be the computer storage, whether it be the flood control engineer, whether it be the paint striper, and start saying, here's our assets in our society, let's make them all tradable. You could create a little widget accounting system that at the end of the quarter you clear widgets because you're going to have things moving around. How many of you have a classroom, a school in your neighborhood, that at 3:45 all the kids are gone and the lunchroom's empty? So why at 4 o'clock is that not the community college? Why at 9:10 isn't that the AA meeting? You're paying for it. You're air conditioning it. This is the solution. If you design me that app, I think I can get Maricopa County Association of Governments and the tribal communities to all join and use it. It's obvious, yet it doesn't exist.
It has in the private sector.
Yeah, it does in the private sector. I now need it for government.
Yeah.
And actually, my utopian vision is over eventually you'll cross-use because you have billions and billions and billions of assets that you've paid for as a taxpayer that we don't use well. And this actually started in a project we're doing for fleet management, where we actually found some agencies, small ones, that had more cars than employees. Okay, how many here have ever used, yeah, serious, but how many of here have ever used something like Zipcar?
Yep.
That's my wife. But I could come to you tomorrow and say, hey, here in Arizona, let's just grab every vehicle government has, put them in a handful of places, and just say, it's a Zipcar model. You type in where you're going, you type in a code, you get it, and oh, by the way, because you told it where you're going, you pick up a couple other people that are all going to Kingman, and I know she's out.
Right.
This is going to be really creepy. The most perfect little girl ever.
That's viral.
Joyce,
Viral.
I love you, and but can I call back in a few minutes? Yes, Dad. Can I call back in a few minutes?
Oh, baby.
All right. Bye. Sorry.
Come on, everybody. Come on.
It's the single hardest thing in the job right now. When she sees the suitcase, she starts to cry.
Oh.
Yeah, I almost quit about 3 weeks ago because I was crying, she was crying. My wife is crying because I woke her up. But this is trying to, I'm genuinely trying to answer your question. So with something like distributive ledger, how do you go to an office and say, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, you have a societal problem where I can't seem to incentivize people to save. So if I came to you tomorrow and said, hey, distributive ledger is about to crash the price of being able to transmit money. So you're the Uber driver. Every time you drop someone off, could you have it automatically grab 25 cents and put it in your IRA? Well, if you do it today, the ACH cost to that is like 17 cents. It would be crazy to put that 25 cents in. You just lost the majority of it to just transfer cost. If we use a blockchain system to transfer that money, it's a 0.01, it's a fraction of a penny. If you're at the VA, how do I keep someone from taking your schedule and deleting you because they get their bonuses if they hit a certain level of efficiency? If I did the scheduling on blockchain, I know if someone touched it because it gets stamped. If you cared about healthcare, how do I get someone that all these medical record systems dump all of it into a personal account for you, I mean, we'll do a token encryption, and in fact, we're actually having a meeting, I think it was with the DARPA folks, to actually create the standard rules, saying here will be the rules for what the encryption links look like so we meet HIPAA standards. But the concept of, okay, you could make it too. Here's my biometric, there's my thumb, here's my passcode, boom, I walked into the emergency room, I walked to my doctor, here's my medical records from all the places. Think of the things those solve societally, and you could do it really inexpensively with today's technology, so you tell it as a story. You don't sit there and say, here's how a node network works, here's how a permission pass works, here's how a timestamping. You don't explain what blockchain is, you explain the revolution it can bring to society.
Right.
It's,
Amazing.
it's the last one I will give you, and this one's quite real. So think about it in this way. The majority of babies in Arizona are born on our Medicaid system. My little girl you just saw, when we adopted her, the mom was on Access. 28-year-old mom, no prenatal care. Even though she had it. She had it. It's just when we survey the moms, the 56% of the babies born in Arizona are born in Access, a substantial number of the moms never go for their prenatal visits. We survey them. Why? Well, it's hot waiting for the bus. Dial-a-ride makes me wait for 4 hours. Is it a societal good that a mom, whether you're in private insurance, a corporate business, or your cash pay, or in part of Access, gets to their prenatal visits? Of course it is. Why wouldn't you let them hit a button called Lift?
Right. Good.
It's so obvious. You all live it. You all think of it. But how do you translate that obvious thing into government saying, instead of waiting for 3 hours, instead of doubling the size of dial-a-ride and saying we'll get it down to 2 hours, just hit a button on Lyft, and the elegance of that is you also get a GPS tag that they actually were at the doctor. I use that just sort of as a conceptual example of not being afraid of this and the revolution it can bring to now help government. Because you all, how many of you could live without carrying this around all day? Now, how do you, so look, I've rambled for a couple minutes here, or a few minutes here, but the question was, how do you get your brothers and sisters in policy making? And you do a lot of that. You don't give them the theory, you actually give them examples. We've just dropped a piece of legislation that I believe is a revolution in environment. There are now these sensors that have come out that talk to your phone, attach to your phone, that will do hydrocarbons, they'll do volatile organics, these things. Sorry, I did this one.
I told you it was your candy,
I have
right?
a video on it, but
On your
Okay.
on your website.
how many of
Yeah.
you have ever had a business where you've had to get environmental permits? Okay, let's actually walk through this sort of conceptually. If you're doing, powder coating or something like that, you get your county permit, your state permit. You may have to also have done some additional filings at the EPA. If you're doing certain volatile organics, you may have to do audit filings every quarter. You have to do a major audit every year. You fill up lots and lots of paper. Do file cabinets full of paper make the air quality of Maricopa County cleaner?
Not so much. Not so much.
No, as a conceptual thought. Do file cabinets full of paper make the air quality cleaner?
Perhaps.
No. They basically are depository, not a suppository, depository for my friends who are trial lawyers to have a place to go, have documents to sue you because your facility's been polluting for 2 years and something was wrong on your pollution equipment. So what would happen if we had a couple thousand people driving around Maricopa County every day with a little sensor on their phone, taking air quality samples every 5 minutes? At the end of a week, you have a couple 100,000 air quality samples, and instantly I know over here saying, hey, there's a problem in this neighborhood, the sensors just went off, let's go find out what it is. And it's a couple clowns painting cars in the back of their lot. Because we don't catch those clowns today, because they're not filling out the paperwork. What we do is we beat the crap out of companies that do fill out the paperwork and play by the rules and play by the gang and the clowns in the lot right behind them who are painting cars without filters get away with it. Our model is half-assed backwards. It's basically a 1938 regulatory model. Turn it upside down and say, he no longer has to fill out paperwork. But if he screws up, guess what? We catch him instantly. Because we have so many samples constantly coming in from the community. It's citizen science meets rational economics. And you can do it for water, you can do it for soil, you can do it for sound, but it's really elegant for air quality. But it was also a model we built for financial markets. Just no one had any idea what I was talking about when I said, we'll do data sampling of financial markets, and that's where we know where bad actors are, and we can do it through an algorithm. No one had any idea what I was talking about. So we actually designed a bill to talk about air quality. We did a cartoon. There's a whole video cartoon out there. It's really wonderful. And that bill now has been introduced. But that's an example of, is that Republican or Democrat? It's not, it's data.
Data.
It's data. You get better air quality and better economic growth using data. It really is, I think, the next revolution of policy, and it would be good for all of us if I can just get my brothers and sisters to drop a little bit of the crazy and listen. And so that's my diatribe.
I told you that was yours. You know, I have no relationship at all. I've never met your wife, but you're about to have no relationship with her either. So we're gonna wrap up.
Yeah. How many of you have a 19-month-old? You basically have no relationships.
In any case, I do want to thank you for coming in. You know, to the extent that we could let the congressman actually see his family, that would be appreciated. I know that he's willing to shake a couple hands, but let's have some sensitivity.
The last thing as I walk out,
Yep.
our office is down here on Shea and Hayden. I am blessed to have a number of freaky smart people. I don't hire poli-sci majors. I hire people, like up until recently, I had a PhD in nuclear physics, and who did all my environmental calculations. He just got hired for the NASA launch team. Reason I say this is if you have a technical question, like we just did something to help someone they wanted to export some type of product to Romania, and there was some weird tariff. And we did the research and helped them. And we actually work with a couple law firms here in town where they'll often call us because we have access to information. If you need a passport tomorrow, you call us. You have a family member.
Wow.
You have a family member, it should be getting VA benefits. Call us. You have an employee that has an immigration issue. We have bilingual folks in our offices. I have a woman named Ernestina over here who's been doing it 24 years. She worked for Bob Stump, she worked for Harry Mitchell, now she works for me. She's just brilliant at what she does. She knows the rules and she knows everyone's assistant. Those of you who get the joke, you understand how the real world works. I have an absolute maniacal fixation that we grow economically in this community. We will help you. We will intercede with you. We will help you do research. We will help you get reports. Think of us as an asset instead of some guy you get to see holding up a bunch of boards on C-SPAN, trying to explain actuarial math. Look, it's the most interesting I've ever done in my life. It's also the worst job I've ever had. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do it and stay sane, but I hope to at least have an impact. So, hey,
All right, thanks, Congressman.